I was surprised to hear all the drugs he did. I had no idea that he was drinking that much or that he was high every day in school.
I'd get up some mornings and I'd be like, man, today's gonna suck. If I had some prescription pills left over from the weekend, I'd pop a couple of those.
This is a disorder of young people. Very little addiction starts after the age of 30. It almost always starts between the ages of 18 and 25.
How can we comprehend the concept of a person that wants to stop doing something and they cannot, despite catastrophic consequences? We're not speaking of little consequences. These are catastrophic. And yet they cannot control their behavior.
I mean, there have been so many things that I haven't accomplished because of the problem, I think.
My drinking's killing me, and I desperately need help.
The right medication with the right therapy really can give an individual a leg up in recovery.
There are more treatments available. There's better understanding. There's more acceptance that this is a medical condition with real medical solutions than there ever has been.
This whole addiction ruling your mind and thoughts, even though I lived through it, I still don't understand it.
Every 2 weeks, something inside me just starts, talking to me or whatever, and it happens.
Relapse is the return to drug use after a period of being drug-free. And it is a cardinal defining feature of the addictions. Even after people have been drug-free for not just days or weeks, but months or years, the tendency to relapse is very strong.
I got sober in 1981 and stayed sober for 17 and a half years through AA, and I had no problem. And then some personal things happened to me in my life, and I just got drunk, and I didn't even think twice about it. And I've been pretty much drunk ever since, and it's been very depressing and very difficult. And I would say I'm at my wit's end.
The problem with these disorders is that despite the extraordinary consequences from these drugs of abuse, the person feels still pulled to return. They've lost so much, and yet in a moment, they make the decision toward drugs, and they make that decision again and again and again.
Maybe I'm not strong enough willed, or I can't figure it out. I mean, it's one of those things that I'm baffled by it. It's frustrating for me to fall back in when I do, because I don't want to, but surely some part of me must want to, or maybe it's just the part that it's not completely out of me. I go through 2 weeks, 20 days. I did have 110 days at one point, and then I picked up a drink, so.
Relapse is not a failure of treatment, it's part of the disorder. So not unlike with hypertension or diabetes or asthma, where you have periods of better functioning and better success, and then you have a period when things are less well controlled. These are chronic relapsing disorders. So is addiction.
So the strategy is not to give up and say, oh my God, he was doing so well for 1 year and now he's relapsed, that's the end. Absolutely not. It says, it's very good that he's been able to stay clean for 1 year. Now he's relapsed, let's restart again. Let's bring that person back into a treatment modality. Let's create, understand what led to the relapse and create a program for that person.
There's something in my head just saying to do it, it craves, that craving takes over my body, and I'll pick up and I'll start using again. Even though I know it's wrong and I know I'm not supposed to, it'll happen. And it's so hard to explain, I don't know what words to use for it, but it's like torture, it really is.
You'll start to bargain with it, to trying to simmer it down. And usually that's what happens. I end up striking a bargain. And the bargain will be, all right, instead of going through all this gnawing, we'll relieve this by, look, you'll just take this much and you'll only do that amount. But the trick in the bargain is that there is no such thing as that. If I get started, I do not stop until it's over.
What is it about this feature of the disorder, relapse, that we don't understand? We're clearly not targeting it well enough. We clearly don't know enough about it to impact it. We better see where relapse lies. And for me, that was in the brain, to understand why the pull, what happens that our patients lose this struggle. In the brain, we have these two important systems. The GO system, the ancient GO circuit for helping us respond to natural rewards that are so important for our survival. And the STOP system, the more recent frontal lobe system, that's important for helping us consider when it's important not to go, not to act on the pull of that reward. When things are working right, the GO circuitry and the STOP circuitry really are interconnected and really talking to each other to help you weigh the consequences of a decision and decide when to go or not to go. So it's not that they're separable, they're interactive, they're interlinked at all times. It's just that it's interesting with our patient situation, it is as though they have become functionally disconnected. It is as though the GO system is sort of running off on its own, is a rogue system now, and is not interacting in a regular, seamless, integrated way with the STOP system.
The craving part is the worst to me, because if I crave, I'm fighting and I go isolated somewhere and try to I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to win one time, but I've never won yet.
The STOP circuit is not able to do its job for a proportion of people. It is as though they are all about the GO, and STOP and the ability to stop has somehow been really compromised. One of the really interesting things is, has exposure to the drug compromised the brakes? Sort of like rubbing out the linings on the brakes, and so that now it's really harder to stop than it would have been if you had never used the substances? Or do people come into the world with brakes that aren't so great? Or both? And we think it's probably both.
I need to be careful who I hang out with, and, it's so easy to pick it up when it's everywhere, It's definitely a challenge to get out.
The person that has gone through treatment, that goes back to their neighborhood or goes back to their friends with whom they used to get high, are likely to relapse under those conditions, to take the drug again. Why? Because of these conditioning responses. The brain has formed an association that immediately triggers the activation of the centers that say, go get the drug.
When you're 6 months sober and you bump into an old drug-using friend, you can feel your heart rate go up. You can almost taste the drug in the back of your throat. It happens automatically. It's not a intelligence issue. It's a biological issue. That's where the conditioning occurs, and that's what the brain disease part of addiction is about.
Everyday life is an obstacle for me, because I run into situations that I get stressed out or I get angry, and I want to use.
Somebody who has attained abstinence after a long period of use is likely to have an abnormal stress response, and if you stress that individual, you put them at great risk for relapse. And by stress in this sense, I mean these are folks that at this point don't have the resilience that the rest of us might have to just the everyday stresses and strains of life, job problems, problems in relationships. In addition to that, if you think about people with addictions and the life that they've sometimes led and chaos that they've basically created in their environment, by definition, they've often got a lot of stress just waiting for them in their recovery.
To look at myself today and to know that I don't have a bank account and that I've already claimed bankruptcy, I don't have a job, I don't have, anything going for me. To make things happen, to change and to do bigger, better things, seems, a lifetime away.
I think there's a belief that the worst part of this is when you're first getting sober, that those first weeks are really the hardest. That's not really the case. What you often see is people walk in the door or are pushed in the door or have bottomed out and awful things have happened, and they come in, and for the first few weeks or months, they've got some resolve and they're really doing this new thing, and it's new and they're making progress, and it's something they feel good about. And then they hit this period where it's like not so much is changing, and it's now a matter of sustaining that. And that's where we really run into relapse problems. We call it the wall, which is a period of this anhedonia, but that's where relapse vulnerability goes up. And that's really one of the more difficult parts of the recovery. And part of what we have to tell people is, it is temporary. You go through it and you come out the other side and you'll feel better, but it's an extremely difficult part of the recovery process, not because it's so severe, but because it lasts a long time. When you come into treatment, you may not experience any pleasure at all in doing things like, going for a walk on a nice day, watching your kids play baseball, doing the normal things of life. But by 6 months, you've started to be able to regenerate pleasure from those activities. And that's part of what we try to focus people on, to look at the benefits of recovery, because it's relearning how to experience pleasure in life without this pharmacological sledgehammer that you were using to get this dopamine rush.
This is the trigger, all of this around me. And you can turn around and look at all of that. And all of that's the trigger, because all of this is where I'm from. And I've always used in this area, some place, some house, some people. The trigger is not only up here, the trigger is when I walk out, open my eyes, and what I see.
Imagine our patients walking through their neighborhood, and almost all of the things in their neighborhood, by the time they come to us in treatment, have become reminders of cocaine, because they see people with whom they've used, they see a street corner where they've purchased, they see places that they have actually used cocaine. All of these things are now potential reminders. So even when they're not walking down the street and consciously saying, oh gosh, this is a cocaine cue, I could be in what we think now when we look at the brain is that these things are coming in and beginning to tingle the brain and activate these circuits even outside the kind of awareness where a person would say, oh, I better try to struggle against this.
When this happens to the addict out there in the world and this trigger happens, they don't know what that is. All they know is something happens, they want to use, and they can't figure out how to not use. When you give people this information and they start to understand what goes on with them, that's an incredible tool they have to help them not use. And so it really is part of understanding of the brain disease.
I have to work on a daily basis to keep what I have, to keep clean and to stay away from it. And that includes having to, get away from people that you hung around with, and not go to those same places. People and places you have to stay away from, or it's like they say, you hanging around in the barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut.
What if people were trained to learn to inhibit, that had more practice, literally doing almost push-ups for the frontal part of their brain, exercising this part of their brain that doesn't get much exercise because in the moment, as we describe, people are going with the go, they often don't have a chance to practice their tools. So one of the things that we've been doing is an intensive program of training people in strategies for reducing the craving.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is a set of techniques that use both cognitive strategies, that is your thinking, and behavioral strategies, that is changing your behavior in order to learn how to not use drugs. It's a set of techniques that helps you learn day to day how to get from here to there without using drugs. Now, some of it means changing your thinking, recognizing when you have craving, when you're starting to obsess about drug use, what to do when that occurs, and then how to change your behavior, that there are certain behaviors that put you at higher risk for using, and how to reduce those behaviors and increase behaviors that are putting you at greater propensity to stay sober. It's a teaching, it's a coaching, as opposed to therapy, which is looking at the long-term reasons for why you got addicted in the first place. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on how to not use drugs and alcohol right now and learning skills that will help you not relapse and stay sober in the future.
Right now I have building up some days. I don't really feel like, that little inner clock or whatever is, I'm in a good zen, I'm gonna go to my meeting tonight or tomorrow and the one on Monday, and my kids are all coming over and we're gonna, I'm not in danger today.
What we can do with all of these disorders is through our understanding, increase the good time so that we can move toward longer and longer periods of good functioning and minimizing the times of actual binging and relapse. And encouraging our patients, as we always do, that at the first sign of trouble, instead of being embarrassed, to rush back to treatment, to intensify treatment, because that's more common, that they will have bumps in the road, and they need to give themselves permission to have a bump and immediately look for reinforcements.